So, hi everyone who is present here at the Zoom meeting or watching this video in retrospect, whether that is from YouTube or I don't know, like you're in a future different nodes of the cloud in which all of the content has been leaked into the space of the commons, and you're just watching like some remixed variation of this on some kind of unforeseen interfacial assemblage. Either way, thanks for being interested in the speculative legal theory network. This is supposed to be a moment where we are rebooting, restarting, like giving a new push to the network after a break of a couple months, during which we haven't had our monthly, more or less, online meetings, but we had a lot of other stuff going on, which we hope might also help give a new push, a new inflow of people and interest and connections to the network, which were two events mainly that happened in the UK. First one was the Critical Legal Conference of 2023, which happened in Durham, and in which we had a stream convened about speculative legal theory in times of techno-ecological crisis. And I think it was quite nice. We got really interesting papers, and I think it was like successful in terms of people being interested and inspired in some way to keep in contact, which is a lot of what this network is supposed to be about. It's about trying to find out about people who are interested in common themes and approaches to legal theory, and trying to help them get together and exchange and work together. So that was an opportunity where we tried to put something out there to reach more people. And then thanks to Alex, who is here, who's a part of the network and is also a part of the of Kent Law School and the Kent Center for Critical Thought, we organized an event there, and which was specifically titled "What is Speculative Legal Theory?" And it's supposed to be, we hope it might one day have been the seminal speculative legal theory event that everyone's going to be wishing they had been there. And this, I think, is a speculative exercise in itself. I think this speculative legal theory network is a speculative fictional exercise, in the sense that I think any kind of academic or intellectual movement or current or field or whatever it is could be, it sort of constitutes itself through narratives that fictionalize and mythify its own existence into existence. So for this to be something, we sort of have to just like talk about it as such, and then it's like potentially could form as a movement, because a lot of what you're doing is pointing to stuff that is already out there but doesn't necessarily explicitly identify in terms of being speculative legal theory. And that's all the way from contemporary legal theorists who are inspired by different speculative, ontological, blah, 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 currents in contemporary thought, or it might be reinterpretations of different moments of the legal tradition, or it might be indigenous, non-Western jurisprudences that get pictured and looked at in terms of speculative legal theory. So it's a kind of a interpretive proposition in terms of interpreting the tradition of legal thought, contemporary legal thought in Agamben's sense of contemporary. If you know that little piece by Agamben where he describes the contemporary as something that is different from what is present. It's something that is not in the future and not in the past, but sort of not in the present either. It's a potential, contemporary potential. And I think by doing this, we can try to establish the discussion itself as such. And this presentation that I'm going to do right now is it's not my own research in the sense of like my main academic line of research, either from my PhD or from my postdoc. It's a broader effort to try to conceptualize one idea, which is not supposed to be the framing for everything that could come through here as speculative legal theory, but it's one framing that I try to make it as open, as broad as possible, precisely so that it can leave enough space of open possibilities for different approaches and different contributions to mix and entangle themselves with this general or generic framework. I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to use the same slides basically that I use in the Kent event workshop, and I'm going to probably spend a little bit more time because we have more time here discussing each of the other things. So can you see it? Is it working? Yeah. Okay. So my presentation was and is titled On Speculative Legal Theory. And this is supposed to make it move forward. Okay. And this is an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. First, it's going to have like three main parts. First, I'm going to try to define an idea of speculative legal theory in terms of a movement from critique to speculation, which is going to have two different senses in which you might understand those words, critique and speculation, in a philosophical sense, and then in an everyday sense, a colloquial sense. Then, after defining speculative legal theory in this sense, I'm going to explain what I see as a contrast or a movement that we can understand from legal correlationism as an interpretation of the modern Western legal theory tradition in a very broad sense, to speculative legal theory, try to define in which senses speculative legal theory contrasts and is like in some sense special or different in relation to legal correlationism. And then we're going to end up by tracing some very general lines of investigation that can emerge without the exclusion of other possibilities from this general definition of speculative legal theory. And those are going to be in the general fields that connect law to technology, to ecology, and to counter-colonial or non-modern or other than Western legalities. Okay, so the first part is from critique to speculation. First, let's talk about the philosophical sense of critique, because those words, critique and speculation, they contrast both in the philosophical discourse and in just like everyday normal speech. In philosophical technical vocabulary, Critique is a very central element of modern thought, not just legal, but in general. It has to do it has its main figure with Immanuel Kant, and it has to do with this movement in which instead of asking directly about things in themselves, we cannot suppose to have access to things in themselves as such. So the whole question turns from being metaphysical or ontological to being epistemological, in the sense that we ask about the conditions for our knowledge of um, anything. So epistemology becomes primary in relation to ontology, and critique is this movement where any possibility of knowledge and of action must be evaluated from the point of view of its conditions of possibility. In Kant, this is just situated in the relation between the knowing subject, is like incorporeal mind relate in its relation to external experience. But then this develops into a number of different phases and variations throughout modern European thought. With Marxism and a lot of critical theory that stems from Marxism, we can say that this critical movement of inquiring about the conditions of possibility is put into the social exterior milieu. So it becomes a question of the social conditions, the reproductive, material conditions, economic conditions for any kind of thought and of practice. Then with the so-called linguistic turn, the problem is moved from the purely intellectual or transcendental realm to the realm of language. So this is also a way to deconstruct the transcendental subject in a way, but it still maintains this mediation between the structures that constitute our languages, our language games, our different linguistic institutions, and that is going to be also deconstructed and problematized even more with post-structuralism and deconstruction. But all of these phases, I think they can be understood as a process of radicalization of critique. So critique turns upon itself and critiques itself, and it becomes more and more critical. But the fundamental priority of epistemology and of the question of the condition of possibility of knowledge remains there and is even radicalized with this evolution. In legal theory specifically, we can understand critique as manifesting both in the liberal and analytic legal theory tradition and in the tradition of critical legal theory. So, for example, legal theorists like Hans Kelsen is extremely critical, not in the sense of being very critical of modern law or of the modern legal institutions. He's not a politically radical. He's like a liberal Democrat. But his structure of legal theory is all about establishing the conditions of legal knowledge and determining what can be known as law. So it's very radically critical in that sense. And a lot of other modern liberal legal theory shares with this to one extent or another. With Hart, that is also made more social, more sociological, more anthropological, more linguistic. It's less based on the conditions of legal knowledge and more in the language games that are made possible by a certain mode of social life. With working, it becomes more hermeneutical, but it's always about the conditions of legal knowledge and of legal discourse, which are embedded in the language and the institutions of law as we know it. And then critical legal theory is also critical in this sense, and even more radically in a way, because then we are going to be looking at how law expresses certain socioeconomic conditions, or how the very possibility of legal knowledge is linked to gender or race differentiations and exclusions. And all of that is very tributary to either Marxism, critical theory, post-structuralism, deconstruction, and so on. And then this sense in which critical legal theory is also critical of law in the political sense, in the sense of being critical of legal knowledge and critical of legal institutions, we are going to move to see that also in this like everyday sense. But first, in the sense of, still in the philosophical sense, turning from that sense of critique that I was describing to speculation, has to do with both the incorporation and drawing from certain contemporary philosophical movements that are happening to different extents in different parts of the humanities, the social sciences, and so on, and bringing them into legal theory and bringing them to bear on legal thought, legal concepts, legal problems, and also in terms of certain turns, in the sense of moving from the privilege of certain problems to others. In terms of the movements that speculative legal theory tends to draw from, we can talk about speculative realism, new materialism, posthumanism, feminist epistemology, object-oriented ontology, ontological turn, which is mostly from contemporary anthropology, comparative metaphysics, actor network theory, assemblage theory, process philosophy, and so on. And in terms of the conceptual turns or thematic turns, we can talk about a move not only from critique to speculation in the sense of abandoning the priority of epistemology and going back to the problem of things in themselves, or of speculating about external reality in a way that is not prefaced, as it were, by the problematization of the conditions of this kind of speculation, but also other movements such as from idealism or anti-realism to realism. You can say that a lot of contemporary theory is not idealistic in a strict sense, but a lot of it is anti-realist in the sense of being very skeptical of the possibility of talking about reality as such, and speculative turn sort of brings back experimentation about discourse about reality and taking seriously the idea that there is a real world out there that we can talk about. And related to that, a movement from epistemology to ontology and metaphysics, in the sense of ontology, in the sense of discourse about being, metaphysics about, discourse about, to use Seller's expression, how things hang together in the most general possible sense. So in general, just not talking that much about the conditions of our knowledge, whether they are psychological, social, linguistic, political, etc., but talking about the objects of our knowledge, or the reality itself as such. Likewise, from language to things and matter, and finally, from points of view that presuppose the separation between nature and culture, to, and here I put these thoughts because I want to suggest not only that we can move from nature versus culture to a point of view that integrates and that doesn't see any difference between nature and culture, which is often what is argued for, but also for another different possibility, which is that the concepts of nature and culture can become variable, and then we can compare between different ways to distribute the binaries such as the nature culture one and their variations, which is what you see, for example, in perspectivism or in what we might call comparative metaphysics. Now, going to the everyday sense that appeared already in the idea of critical legal theory, we can talk of critique simply in the sense of criticizing actually existing legal institutions or criticizing legal theory, criticizing the concepts, the narratives, the traditions of legal theory as we know it. And this, of course, is still important, and we probably need to continue to do that. But speculative legal theory proposes that we also add to that a practice of speculation about what law might become or turn out to be. And that is in general, but also specifically, concretely, in the context of some contemporary transitions or events that appear to be particularly relevant in terms of putting the very idea of what law is or might be in question. One of those is accelerating technological transformation. Another one is the Anthropocene. And finally, and this connects to the other two very strongly, we might also inquire what law might become or turn out to be from the point of view of other human or non-human beings. So second part, from legal correlationism to speculative legal theory. I'm going to give Alex I'm going to make you a co-host, just because I'm afraid that I might not see that someone is on the waiting room. So it's probably good to have someone else who can also let people in. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. So from legal correlationism to speculative legal theory. So the idea of correlationism is something I'm borrowing from Quentin Meillassoux, who is one seminal figure of the movement that is often referred to as speculative realism or speculative materialism, which I think is the expression that he himself uses. And I'm borrowing this idea of correlationism from him in a very loose sense that is often done. Like it has become something that people use sometimes in a way that's not too rigorous in relation to Meillassoux' own work. And especially in this case, I'm sort of transferring it to the context of legal theory rather than metaphysics. But in Meillassoux, correlationism is, in his words, the idea according to which we only have access to the correlation between thinking and being, and never to either term considered apart from the other. So the correlation is the correlation between thinking and being, or even between, well, I'm not going to repeat all of the variations that I've just said, but so the legal version of that, I propose, can be understood in terms of an approach to legal theory according to which law can only be known on the basis of the is-ought opposition. So my claim here is that the main correlation in legal theory is not exactly that between thinking and being, though it is sort of related to it, but it is rather the distinction between norms and facts, between that which is and that which ought to be, and all of the series of binary distinctions that run parallel on the basis of that, such as persons and things, validity and efficacy, law as an abstract system of norms, and law as a concrete technology of social governance. Because in the context of legal correlationism, in as much as you take the is-ought opposition as an epistemical presupposition of all legal knowledge, natural and technological reality can then only appear to legal thought as axiologically neutral fact and as the potential object of legal regulation. So you look at technologies, you look at non-human beings, and you cannot see any law, you cannot see any normativity, you can only see facts, and as such, facts that might be made to correspond to a legal norm, and thus the object of legal efficacy. Now, speculative legal theory, in contrast to that, has a number of general characteristics that you can summarize here. First, the is-ought distinction appears not as a presupposition of legal thinking in general, but as a product of a concrete nomic order. This I'm taking from Carl Schmitt, which I think does invert the situation in the sense that, and this has to do with him being a sort of an anti-modern legal thinker. For Schmitt, any distinction between is and ought cannot be the starting point from legal thought. It is actually something that comes a posteriori, in a way. It is the product. It is only possible to make and to maintain this kind of distinction on the basis of a certain territorial form of life, and the life world, the mythical, the cosmological world that emerges from this concrete order, from this conjunction of a certain territory and a certain process of ordering. So any is-ought distinction, if it is to appear, it cannot be a presupposition. It can only be the result of a nomic order, of a nomic process. And second, the task of legal theory is not only to analyze and criticize actually existing legal thought and practice, but also to think what else law may be or may turn out to be. This turn out to be that I insist on is because we might think that the question is what law may become in the future other than what it is now. But I think this temporal linear progression itself is something that has necessarily to be put into question, because it is part of the structure of a certain understanding of law, which projects its future efficacy, and in this way linearizes law as a historical process. But I think when we are talking about speculation about what else law may be, the very question of how you correlate those legal orders in time itself becomes questioned. And it often is not going to be about the future or about the past, but it's going to be about an elsewhere, in a sense, for example, in which you might speculate about other legal orders from other than the modern Western law. So it can be something that you can understand both as something that comes from an archaic mythical past, but which also presents itself as a possible future. And in a way, it is just beside beside the starting point of modern legal thought. It is starting from somewhere else, starting from a different territorial set of coordinates, as it were. And third, speculative legal theory implies, let's say, that we may not be able to know certain nomic orders as such, but that the fact that we can't know them as such does not entail that they do not exist as such. So speculative legal theory doesn't imply that we can have like a non-problematic direct access, whether that is to different nomic orders or to the future of law as it's going to be transformed by technology or by ecological transformations, all of that is still opaque, is still problematic in terms of how you can think it. But the fact that it's not something that we have direct access to does not mean that it doesn't exist in itself. And that is kind of a challenge, a radical challenge that is put to legal thought in those terms. So with that definition, very general, as I said, like very open definition of speculative legal theory, we can go through three general lines of investigation that, as I said before, are not meant to be exclusive, but are, I think, just particularly salient in our present contemporary context. So the first one is the challenge of understanding technology as law. We already have, of course, a very big movement and a lot of attention and a lot of discussion in contemporary legal academia about the relation between law and technology. But mostly that tends to appear in terms that we may call correlationist terms, which is to say the question is posed in terms of, okay, we have law and we have these technologies. How can law, or can law at all, but how could law regulate those technologies? How should law regulate those technologies? But the technologies themselves are not often understood as law, or at least not in a literal sense, or in a sense that draws all of the consequences from understanding those as law. So there's two main references that I would like to refer to here that I think point to the direction of a speculative legal theory of technology as law. First one is the idea of the nomos of the cloud, or of platform sovereignty, that is developed by Benjamin Bratton, who's a design theorist, in his book, The Stack on Software and Sovereignty, which is a really big book that he defines as a design brief. And it is a contemporary media theory, design theory, architecture theory book. It's not a legal theory book. So it doesn't develop the legal concepts involved that much. And he ends up going a way that is quite different from the Schmittian basis that he establishes with his idea of the nomos of the cloud, which he defines in contrast to the Schmittian nomos of the earth. But either way, I think it is an interesting suggestion that cloud platforms can be understood as a new nomos, and you can think that state law and Westphalian international order can be destabilized by the emergence of new nomic infrastructures, such as platforms, that then start having relationships with those more traditional forms of nomic order, which are themselves political and in a way a part of a new kind of international law or geopolitics, between platforms and states. Another way to get at this question is developed by Michael Hildebrand, who is contemporary philosopher of law and technology, and she, drawing a bit from Bruno Latour and science and technology studies, he talks about modern law's mode of existence, using those terms, as something that is conditioned as such and afforded by modern legal technologies, by a certain set of technologies which has been historically contingent. And just as it has transformed pre-modern law which was based on different technological infrastructures with the introduction of the printing press and other modern legal technologies, law may radically change again if and in as much as law migrates to different new legal technologies. So Hildebrandt and Cubicle, which is a research project um, that she constructed and that I was affiliate to, um, they explore this transformation in terms of code-driven and data-driven law, which is to say, in the sense that contemporary coding technologies, which make legal propositions into automatically implementable programs, whether that is simply in any kind of formal computer executable language that is supposed to translate certain areas of law into an executable program, or whether it is about smart contracts that are running on distributed ledger technology. That's data-driven, that's code-driven law. And then data-driven law is about algorithm, machine learning based prediction or prediction of legal results. So the use basically of artificial intelligence in law and how that transforms the mode of existence of law as we know it. To quote Hildebrandt, we should not take for granted that law as we know it will be an affordance of the technologies of data-driven or code-driven agency. So this opens up, I think, the possibility and the necessity of speculative legal theory in the sense that we cannot take for granted that law as we know it will continue. Therefore, we cannot take for granted the legal protections that we have. We have to make sure that we navigate this transition in a way that is safe and sustainable, but also it is, I think, an opportunity to invent other better ways in which law could also be. It's not only an opportunity to lose what we have, though that is a very real danger, but it's also an opportunity to make interventions in terms of participating in the determination of what future mode of existence of law might be. I would just like to refer here to a paper that I wrote to Cubicle's journal that's called Circle, cross-disciplinary research in computational law. It's an open access journal where there is a cross-disciplinary process in the sense that usually if you're writing from the point of view of legal theory, you should get a response from someone, or if you're writing from the point of view of law or legal theory, you're going to get a response from someone who is working from the point of view of new technologies and vice versa. So the idea is to make those different areas of knowledge enter into dialogue. And I just published a paper there titled Platforms as Law, a Speculative Theory of Coded Interfacial and Environmental Norms, in which I try to set out a certain conceptual apparatus to deal with these problems. And also, it's the first time that I've ever published a paper where I advance the definition of what I understand as speculative legal theory. It's not as general as what I am presenting here. It is more restricted to this problem of law and technology, but in any case, it's explicitly thematized there, like the problem of what speculative legal theory might be and how it is relevant in some way. Then another contemporary problem that calls for speculative legal theory in certain ways is the problem of the Anthropocene or of climate change or climate catastrophe, depending on how optimistic you are. Ecology as law. So the idea here is that the Anthropocene pushes us to think beyond the nature-culture divide and to structure our institutions accordingly. So the idea is that we must create legal concepts that allow us to understand ecosystems as nomic orders, because as a lot of people argue, we have good reason to think that the way the nature, culture, is, art, etc. distinction has been sort of built into the very software of modern Western political and legal institutions, has a considerable part in what has happened until this moment, what has taken us here in terms of climate change, in terms of the unlimited exploration of nature as a mere unlimited resource. So therefore, we might think that we should create legal concepts that allow us to understand ecosystems as nomic orders. One contemporary theorist who does this in a very systematic and very interesting and inspiring way is Margaret Davis, who has been the first guest that we had here at our online study group. You can check out the recording of our meeting with her on YouTube. And then there's also indigenous nomics, in the sense of nomic orders and nomic thinking. And then I'm giving here the examples of Aaron Mills, who is an indigenous legal thinker from Canada, Anishinaabe legal thinker, who talks about indigenous rooted constitutionalism in his terms, or Kirsten Anker, who is also from McGill. They're both in McGill in Montreal. And Anka is not indigenous herself, but she works with contemporary anthropology and ontological turn anthropology in order to think in dialogue in some way with indigenous legal thinking. And she also speculates about the possibility of thinking of law as a forest through dialogue with ontological turn anthropology, especially the work of Eduardo Con, who talks about how forests think. And this leads us to the third and final stream, which I even gave it a separate part here at the end, which is the idea of other than modern, other than Western nomic orders. And this includes indigenous nomic thinking, but it also opens up to the possibility of other than human nomic orders in the same terms and just as well. So basically all that has been said until this point, I think, points towards the multiplicity not only of cultural legal systems as you would have in a modern multicultural environment, but also to the multiplicity of conceptions and experiences of the relation between law, nature, and techniques. So the very definition of what counts as law, what counts as nature, and what counts as technology is itself something that varies in an unlimited number of situations in which you have a nomic process, a self-constitutive process of nomic ordering. So those different nomoi, with their respective ways of diagramming the relations between law, nature, and technology, they themselves constitute themselves nomically. They emerge from a territorially situated process that is itself legal, is itself technological, and is itself natural, of constructing the conditions of a certain order in which a concept of law can make any kind of sense. And this includes not only non-modern nomic worlds or perspectives, such as, let's say, a perspectivist Amazonian conception of the nomos, but also and often through those other nomic worlds and perspectives, it includes non-human worlds and perspectives, in the sense in which if you start from a perspectivist point of view, in the sense that Eduardo Viveros de Castro talks about, describing certain Amazonian and other indigenous cosmologies, then you not only suppose that every human group, every human people has their own nomos and their own point of view on what counts as law, as nature, and as technology, but also you must suppose that non-humans, such as animals or ecosystems, or even, you know, geographical realities, or astronomic objects, or mythical entities and such, all of them have their own way of ordering their own world, which includes their own law and their own way of understanding the relationships between law, nature, and technology. So that would be it. Thanks so much for bearing with me. And I would like to open up the space not only to discuss or to ask questions about what I've just presented, but also to simply try to think about what we can do moving forward from here, in the sense that ideally what I presented here is supposed to work not as much as a closed and personal and private take on all of this, but also in a way to provide an interface through which we can connect different things, different interests. We can make sense of how the different things that we are doing in our different research can be able to come together and connect, and what are the common questions, how we can try to collaborate in some way into building an integrated sense of speculative legal theory, even though it's not supposed to be fully coherent. I mean, the whole idea of this multiversal quality of speculative thinking that I was talking about sort of presupposes that also any intervention, like all the different points of view that each one of us is going to have on this whole map that I just tried to do here, is also going to be on the same level. So, like, you know, if each one of you has their own take on, like, from your own work, from your own position on what speculative legal theory is, the idea is that those things could be all on the same level and serve as ways to sort of counter interpret each other in productive ways. So I just wanted to make this really clear, in the sense that though I'm trying to make a movement here to sort of like an integrative, you know, large sort of broad strokes movement, I also don't want it to over determine or to be overly structured in a way that would stifle the diversity of takes that you can have on what speculative legal theory may be. But yeah, okay, let's open to the floor.
I'm happy to go first.
Yeah, please.
No one else wants to. So hi everyone, I'm Simon and Jose. We met very briefly at CLC. I don't think I've met anyone else. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it to any of the, well, I didn't end up going to any of the speculative legal theory sessions at CLC. So this is all new to me, and I was really curious to come along and hear what you think speculative legal theory is. And of course, to try and answer the question to myself, is my work speculative legal theory, even though I've never conceived of it as such? I think the answer is yes. I have been thinking of it rather as prefigurative legal theory. And I invented this concept in my PhD that I call prefigurative constitutionality. Um, and I think it resonated most strongly with where you were talking about the existence of nomic orders that we may not yet have access to, in more or less the way you phrased it. So that reminded me of Ernst Bloch's claim for the existence of the not yet, as he puts it, which gets picked up by people like John Holloway and his prefigurative open Marxism, and more especially for me in Tony Negri's method of the tendency, and the way he tries to extrapolate prefigurative, or what he also calls dysutopian, trajectories of change, most especially for Negri, as for me, flowing from social movements, and the way in which the, as you would put it, nomic orderings of social movements, in my, and I think Negri's view as well, prefigure radically democratic constitutionalities of the future. And so my PhD was all about trying to elaborate that theory and apply it to municipalism in Madrid, and really make this question of what you call speculative legal theory one of political strategy. So it's really interesting to see you broaden this out to maybe less agential processes as well as agential processes. My focus is much more on the strategic agential process of trying to, how movements are actively imagining a future constitution of radical democracy, and how that is expressed in what we would normally call their mere organization, but how a constitutional reading of that organization, it allows us to imagine future constitutionalities, and I use the word constitutionality in order to leave it more open than just constitutionalism with its liberal baggage, to prefigure those future constitutionalities, as well as opening up a new avenue of critique and understanding of the movement itself and its strategy and how it seeks to achieve its aims, which for the movements I'm interested in is transformative, social, institutional, democratic, and legal change. And it's been really interesting to see this occurring through processes of parallel evolution in other places. You have people like Ruth Kinna at Loughborough analyzing Occupy London and Occupy Wall Street as forms of anarchic constitution making, which overlaps very strongly with my work. And then you have the Utopian Legalities Network, which is still quite young itself, with people like Davina Cooper working on prefigurative understandings of law, quite different, I think, understandings, but still using the concept of prefiguration or to understand law. And I think, yeah, there's some really fruitful overlaps between my work, their work, and what you're talking about as speculative legal theory. And I'm really excited to keep discussing them in future meetings.
Thanks so much. I don't know if I respond or does someone else want to come in? Like, I don't want to make it sound like it has to come back to me after each intervention. Come on, Favor.
Can you guys see me? My hat looks weird. Let me just take it off. Hello, everyone. Hello, Emmanuel.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. My head looks very weird. Okay, I have a small head. Yes, I don't know enough about Simon's research to respond to your research, Simon. But I wanted to comment on Jose's presentation and ask a few questions about what I am also doing and ask for everybody's feedback. So I wanted to ask, I think now I have a better understanding of what speculative legal theory is, beyond my previous understanding that, well, since I'm interested in future technologies and how African women will use them, that, well, I thought that was basically my into this group. But well, I suppose the way my research has developed is that now I am thinking about how the context of how African women exist, their positionality, I don't know if that's quite the right word. Well, the identity anyway provides a unique interaction or a unique sense of being that causes people to interact with, well, avatars specifically, but other technologies in very specific ways. And that this unique identity and the unique ways of interacting with the world therefore means that in order to adequately, well, regulate or design laws regarding the design and the use of these technologies, we need to develop theories and means of regulations that take that into account. So that's I wanted to say. I suppose I wanted to ask if that was a valid understanding of speculative legal theory, and then I also wanted to ask. I probably missed it because I joined late. I wanted to ask if you could explain more what, well, Nomos is. So I understand it as platform, but I don't know if that is a sufficient understanding. And then also, whenever I listen to you talk, and whenever you talk about your research, I feel like and I know you've mentioned that it's not that you are critical of code as law, but I feel also that I don't understand what the distinction is. How would you say that, the idea of norms, for instance, or technological platforms and laws, even maybe an affordance of these technologies conflicts with, code as law, but your critique of it, I don't fully understand. And then finally, I wanted to ask about qualitative research. What do you guys think is the place of qualitative research or empirical research in theorizing? It seems, well, theorizing is considered, well, armchair stuff, but and then empirical research is going out into the world and getting data. But I was curious about your thoughts on that, and those were my questions.
Thanks, Favor. I'm taking notes. I'm going to come back to everyone, but does someone else want to talk now? Hermano?
Hi, it's so nice to see all of you here today. I have a question that connects about to your presentation and connects also to what Faber said with regards to norms. Like, if you could specify a little bit more, what do you intend by norms, but also in general, I see there was in a slide you said modern law way of existence, modern law mode of existence. Like, do you kind of attribute to the current law modernity's attributes? And in which case, then my question is, well, how do you conceive modernity? Shall we see law in a modern way, in a sense of, kind of law that subscribes to a modernist manifesto, or should we interpret modernity in the sense of Latour, who kind of wrote the book like "We've Never Been Modern," so like almost as a fiction, this fictionality of modernity that then in reality does not exist per se. So that's and also when you refer to legal order, a couple of times I think, and I think that's the mistake I kind of make very often. I kind of presuppose that there is a legal order sometimes when I refer to legal order, but then while you think and elaborate, you realize that actually part of this speculative legal theory task is actually to kind of identify to the broadest extent of our capacity our other legal orders that exist. So if you can just comment on these 3 points, what is the nomos meaning of modern law and legal order? Thank you.
Those are all great questions. Corina?
Thank you, Jose, for your presentation and for organizing this. Thank you so much. It's very nice to be here and meeting you all. I was actually, it's not a question directly to you. Maybe it's something we can all discuss. It's something that I have a difficulty with when it comes to speculativism, in the sense that I came across that in my research, which has to do with social ontology and legal theory. And when I was trying to map the literature in speculativism, you know, the way I mapped it, it was like there is this strand of authors like Melisieux that you mentioned, and Bashkar. Am I saying the name correctly? I'm not sure. You know, like Brian, Harman, all of these who are in the spectrum of, let's say, law, like ontology and technology, and they sort of are connected with the speculative turn. And on the other hand, what I came across is this strand of feminists who are connected with new materialism and with the speculative turn, but understood as material turn. And there you have Braidotti and Haraway and also Toscano, you know. And the way I don't personally, I don't understand if these scholars are all, you know, connected and understand speculativism in the same way, or if there are certain nuances and distinctions in their approach. Because the way I see speculativism, at least at first, is an approach in the sense that, you know, we move past the Kantian tradition of abstract rationalism and the broad philosophy of transcendentalism, and we go back to the dichotomy of, you know, empiricism or high abstraction. So the way I see it is like speculation is a way towards empiricism, but not in, you know, radical empiricism. So you have situated knowledge, lived experience, and all this. But I don't understand personally how, you know, this broad spectrum of speculativism is connected with, you know, Kantian ethics or, you know, with this tradition. So yeah, so that was one huge question that I have a difficulty. And I had another one, but I forgot now because I haven't slept much. I hope I was structured my thought. Anyways, thank you. That's it for now.
Thanks so much. I think I'm going to try to address some of this because otherwise it's going to be like too much, but I'm going to do like not in the order, because I think it makes sense to sort of go like the other way around. First, like about Corina's question. I think this is just like there's no true perspective on the different currents and how to connect them. Like it really seems like like if you look at it from the point of view of speculative realism, you can see all of those authors in terms of speculative realism. And if you look at it from the point of view of new materialism, you can also interpret all of them, but it changes the constellation, like it changes who is in the center and who is in the periphery. It changes the importance of questions. It was really interesting what you brought in terms of because usually when you think, okay, we're going to cancel Kant, like, okay, Kant has been determining the basic infrastructure of modern thought for a couple centuries, so let's bracket that and let's get back, or like it's open whether it is getting back or moving on to speculation again. But usually it doesn't appear in the sense that, well, what you had before Kant, more than anything else, was this highly tensioned contrast between pure rationalism and pure empiricism. And what he's doing is trying to mediate that. I think in a way you can look at speculative realism, which is, the voice, the white guys, like and very abstract, very philosophical kind of discourse, and new materialism, which is all about flows and much more connected to feminism and to it's thought more in terms of materiality and affect and blah blah. Sort of sounds like there could be some correspondence there between an emphasis on like pure rationalist metaphysics and radical empiricism. I don't know. I hadn't thought about that in those terms. I don't know if that has to do with what you were thinking about, but I think I just like the word speculation in part because of the kind of thing that I was able to say based on it in this presentation. I think it makes the pitch easier to make. But like we are also organizing a special issue that is about like law and the ontological turn, and to me it's like same things, but it gives more centrality to certain stuff. Like ontological turn, because it's coming from anthropology, it's a lot more connected to non-Western cosmologies than either of those two that we just mentioned. It's a lot more connected to the ecological question, at least in comparison to speculative realism. New materialism is also very connected to that in a different way. Like new materialism gets to that more through like contemporary physics and like natural sciences, not that much from a point of view of non-Western cosmologies. So, I think it's just a difference of emphasis finally, but I think they all have in common a certain number of questions and problems that I tried to summarize here. And that has a lot to do with what Hermano asked in terms of what is modern law's mode of existence, what's the specificity of that. And I really like that you brought up the question of the fictionality of modernity, because I think that is very central. Like for me, the greatest paradigm of modern legal thought is Hans Kelsen. I think Hans Kelsen is probably, to me, is the most important modernist legal political thinker, because no one has been as much of a modernist in not only legal but political thought, in the sense of completely limiting the scope of thinking about not only law but about the state to the epistemological conditions of legal knowledge. So you can't talk about politics, you can't talk about morals. It's not about nature either. Like you can talk about nature, but that's for the natural sciences. So legal thought is here completely reduced to the epistemic distinction between is and ought, which I think is the center of this idea of legal correlationism, which you can also talk about in terms of Latour's Constitution of the Moderns. Now, one thing that is important about the way Kelsen puts this is that this is a fiction in the sense of Hans Weichinger, in the sense of a productive fiction, and as if So if we act as if law exists and is such and such, that is the functional, operational basis, like it's the software for the operation of law as we know it. So it's sort of a self-realizing fiction, even though it never really corresponds to reality. It is only relatively, it has a degree of efficacy, but it doesn't have like absolute efficacy. It has a degree of efficacy which makes it possible to work with those concepts. So even though we haven't ever been legally modern, law itself is a hypothesis that is at the core of the very political and material process that creates the condition for modern discourse to make sense. So it's sort of a circular process, and law is at the very point of articulation between nature and culture and modernity. Like law is really one of the main parts of the way modernity divides nature and culture in terms of being and norms. And it's also the infrastructure that reproduces those conditions. It's part of what Latour calls the process of purification. You have to be purifying those two poles all the time, and that's why Kelsen does a pure theory of law. Kelsen is like the biggest purificator, modern purificator of legal thought. And then getting more to the specific works of both Simon and Favor, I think it's very interesting what Simon brought here, like because I think one theme that it's important to touch upon is that even though we are talking here like speculatively, we are creating a narrative in which there is a certain rupture, there is a certain contrast between speculative legal theory and critical legal theory that is within the context also of a lot of continuity. And I think we should interpret it just as much in terms of contrast as in terms of continuity. And I think that's even like politically important in the sense that we are not against the movement of critical legal theory and critical legal studies. We're sort of developing it in a direction that creates some internal contrast. And I'm saying that because I think one step in the process of critical legal theory that has been, I think, consolidated in a way in a volume that is called something like New Critical Legal Thinking or something like that, that was organized, I think, by Kostas Dousinas, Ilan Wall, and other people, which is all about this turn in recent critical legal theory to the problems of constitutional power or deconstitutional. Like, you know, there's this whole tension between the Negrian, Deleuzian take on this and the Agambenian, Benjaminian, Heideggerian take. But both of those are clearly already not just epistemic or critical, they are ontological and metaphysical. You know, like the Negrian take on constitutional power is like Deleuzian metaphysical empiricism. It's and at the same time for me, and then I can like throw that back to you as a question also, is that not enough yet in terms of the problem of the human / non-human, in the sense that for some reason, which is not clear to me, in Negri, even though he is very Deleuzian and post-humanist in that sense, it all seems to be all about humans most of the time. The multitude seems to be a multitude of human proletarians, at best, sort of cyborgized with the machinery, right? There's a big, you know, there's a lot of weight to the fragment about machines from Marx, and the whole like anti-Oedipus / Lyotard theme of the becoming machine of the laborer and the becoming laborer of the machine. But the ecological question, the question of non-humans, seems to not be that central there. And I wonder whether there could be an interpretation of constitutional power in the Negrian sense that takes it even further in this speculative, non-humanist direction. Because I think the centrality of production and of labor and all that, even within a communist framework, can still be complicit with anthropocentric commitments that have to do with the problem of overproduction, of growth, the growth of human production on the face of the earth, and all that. I'm unsure about what to do with that. I really like the whole problematic scene, and I was very close to that also, like for quite a while. And so yeah, it's really nice that you're bringing that that side of things to our discussion. And about Favor's work, like we've talked about that before, I think it's a very interesting case for speculative legal theory when you ask the question about what is it to be an avatar and to be on those platforms as an avatar. Like, I think the construction of the human as we know it, the human person, is very much connected to this operation that I was talking about, the operation of modern law in terms of purifying the person and the thing, and determining what are the terms of the relation between the person and the thing, and all that. And as you move onto this nomos of the cloud, onto the nomos of platforms, then you can take for granted that you are a person on there. And at the same time, there's a lot of interfacial and codified norms and algorithmic processes that are constantly determining a lot of the regulation of the way in which you participate on that platform. And that can be like, consolidated in figures such as the profile, the user, or as in your work, the avatar, which I think is a very interesting concept, not only because it dialogues with this technological side, but also because it dialogues also, like, with other than modern cosmologies. In this idea of the avatar, there is this theological, spiritual tradition that is sort of being mobilized, whether that is from Indian traditional thought, whether it is, I mean, Indian, not in the sense of indigenous, which is like a politically incorrect way that I would not be using, but in the sense of traditional Hindu religion, or such, where I mean, I'm not very acquainted with the traditional idea of the avatar, but I think it's interesting that it is of such a type, and it also opens, as we've discussed also before, to other technologies of the interface between spiritual and bodily configurations, such as those that happen in also Yoruba religion, and like diasporic African religion here in Brazil also. So a lot of interesting possibilities are open that way. About the code as law thing, in this paper that I mentioned about platforms as law, the first section is titled taking code as law seriously. And I think that's like there you can find an answer to, if I understood correctly your question, to how I take the debate that has already been going on for a lot of years about code is law. My claim is that code is law, even though it does say, code is law, like as Lawrence Lessig said, like for decades ago, it really doesn't get taken to all of its consequences. It's always as it were metaphorical, like you're saying that code is like law in some sense, but it's also different from law. And then the question is, how do you make code comply with law, and whether you can submit the rule of code to the rule of law, but you never just move on to looking at code legally, which is what I think is the task for speculative legal theory in a strict sense in relation to the problem of code as law. It is what is it that we need to do in terms of legal thought to make it possible to think of code and of interfaces in legal terms directly, which is something that I try to do in my own way in that paper through those ideas of coded norms, interfacial norms, and then environmental norms. But yeah, I don't know if you want to also like respond to each other or bring other stuff to the table. I've already talked for a while now.
I mean, on the theme of practice, there was a question that was something to the extent of like whether speculative legal theory has a practical element or whether there's some way in which it's inflected through practice, wasn't there, or anyway, I mean, I think it kind of gets to a tension that I see in the way that speculative legal theory is being articulated, and that's kind of assuming or it's both ontological and epistemological at the same time. And for me, that's a bit uncomfortable place to be. In other words, kind of either through the process of investigation or inquiry, you're kind of discovering or creating the way of observing that which you are inquiring into, if that makes sense. Or it's kind of already there and you're approaching it from the outside, if that makes sense. And I'm kind of the opinion that it's never just there being approached from the outside. You're always kind of co-producing as you're inquiring, as you're asking about this thing and trying to. So I can maybe give a more specific example, which is, no surprise, the Anthropocene, right? Like this is a theme that I feel like it doesn't just exist, but that's kind of what's interesting about it, is that when scientists talk about it, they talk about it as if it is just already there. Like here it is, it's undeniable. But the point is that they're creating the conditions of then being able to say, oh, but it's just here. We're just passive observers. And kind of the way that folds into speculative thinking is that the Anthropocene is anticipatory in a sense, is saying about what will happen, or kind of how we will be read from the future. So it's a speculative approach, but the point is that pretense that it's just there, objective, it's ontological, it just is, I find to be a complete construct. And so kind of I've thought about speculative legal thinking or speculative normative thinking as kind of how are these assumptions cast as always having been there, when clearly you can demonstrate kind of how they're being created speculatively. So I don't know, I mean, but this is something I feel like is a provocation I always kind of have in mind when I hear your talks about this tension between an epistemological approach and an ontological one. So is it just there, or are we creating it?
I could answer very directly to that, but I think maybe Simon can also talk now and I'll talk later. What do you think? Does it have to do like with this?
Picking up on a theme that I noticed common to what Alex said and what you said, Zay, and also what I said. Maybe if yours is more precise to Alex, maybe you want to come in first and I can come after.
No. Go on.
So I'm just noticing the recurrence of the idea of the as if. It really jumped out to me when you mentioned it, Zay. It was there implicitly in what I said, although I didn't mention those words. So the work of Davina Cooper, I mentioned her work on prefigurative legalities, and I was reminded when you mentioned the as if of Hans Kelsen, fascinatingly, that the as if is Davina Cooper's key concept in explaining her definition of prefiguration. In that for her, it's like when social movements or activists are acting as if they are speculating towards a utopian future, acting as if it is already the case, or maybe even a more pragmatic, more immediate future. Like, I think some of our examples are things like acting as if the law was different in this one really specific way. So direct action also would be a really sort of fruitful area for this acting as if. And then you mentioned Hans Kelsen, fascinatingly, talking about the law acting as I don't know my Hans Kelsen as well as I should, so I can't repeat what you were saying. It was super accurately, but it's something about the law itself acting as if it, I don't know, has the power that it wants to have or something like that, which was super interesting. I should look that up later. Which reminds me of how I've been trying to, through the process of my PhD and subsequently, challenge my own concept of prefigurative legalities to think, well, how far does this go? Is this just a question for prefigurative social movements? I answered that in my thesis, and I think no, it's a question of path dependency, and so you can accidentally prefigure a future that you don't want. And I assign that to left populism and it being sort of anti-democratic and undermining its own strategy for radical democracy. And then I sort of started thinking, well, is neoliberalism prefigurative in some way, trying to prefigure an even more extreme neoliberal marketized society? And I think it is. Is there a way in which the status quo tries to prefigure itself, prefigure its own continuation, et cetera, et cetera? And I haven't answered most of those questions confidently yet. But that I was reminded of that with the as if of Kelsen's law. And then Alex mentioned the as if of the Anthropocene, that people are acting and talking as if it exists, even if its ontological validity is in question. So basically, this brings me back again to thinking about the similarities and differences between speculation and prefiguration. And I suppose for me, the speculative is maybe the kind of the utopian thinking that is a dimension of prefiguration. But the area of prefiguration that falls outside the Venn diagram would be, also reminds me of what Favor was talking about in terms of the role of empirics, where my theory of prefigured constitutionality is very empirical. I frame it in the thesis as a form of grounded theory, essentially, starting with what social movements are doing and saying about themselves, and also similar to Negri's method of the tendency, trying to interpret what people are doing and saying as a political strategy and as their own speculation of their own utopian future. And so when you raise the idea of the question of non-human beings and Negri's kind of blind spot to that, that made me think that seems to be where you have to be more speculative, in that you are using your human version of reason and agency to speculate on behalf of the non-human being and what their relationship to law might be, what their nomic order might be, if it makes sense to talk of that, versus the prefigurative sort of methodology, such as it is, of a kind of grounded theory starting with empirical study and interpreting from there through the tendency. I was very disordered, but those are some of the wonderful inspirations that you've all been giving me.
To me, it makes sense. I think it's really insightful. I mean, this makes me think that one thing that we could do is read some pragmatist stuff, because I Zay's laughing because I say this all the time, but I just feel like it really ties in. I mean, that's a really interesting area that is not completely in an ontological. Well, actually, I would say it's actually completely in an epistemological camp, but it is appreciative of an ontological take. So it sorts through those problems a lot, and it doesn't have to be something necessarily old like John Dewey. It could be, some more recent literature like Ha-Seok Chang. Sorry, I just need to answer this call. Sorry.
I would love to read some pragmatism. That's been on my list of things I need to read more of.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it too. I always say that to Alex. I mean, I even think that yeah, I understand that you can read it like in a very epistemological way, but I also think that it makes the line between epistemology and ontology very blurry, and especially like some contemporary takes on pragmatism, such as like a lot of the people that are connected to this speculative ontological turn, such as Isabelle Stengers, what's the guy's name? He there's another scholar also who works with her.
Prigozhin.
Sorry?
Ilya Prigozhin? Are you talking about Ilya
No,
Prigozhin?
no. I was thinking about the younger philosopher that was with her now. I can't remember his name now. But anyway, they are working a lot with, they're reading a lot of William James in sort of like this multiversalist take in which, but what I wanted to answer in this, I mean, I don't know if Alex is listening now, so maybe I'm going to come back to that later, because it would be like answering his question. Did you want to say something, Corina? Because I think maybe like I don't remember what I was going to answer to Simon, and I think if I wait for Alex to come back, then I can connect the two things again.
I just had a question to Simon about how the meaning of prefigurative. Is it in the sense of predetermined? Because you mentioned something about how your work is connected to agency and agential interpretations, if I got that right. And I was wondering how you understand the idea of prefigurative, how prefigurative can be at the same time agential. Or maybe I didn't get it right. I don't know. Just
I missed one crucial word in what you said, where the audio just cut out briefly. You said, "Is it prefigurative in the sense of blank?"
Oh, sorry. Is it prefigurative in the sense of predetermined? Because if it's predetermined, then how can it be agential? If like
Yeah, no, yeah, good question. So no, not in the sense of being predetermined. So that would be the old Christian sense of prefiguration, where the word ultimately comes from, where it's a prophetic form of prefiguration.
I was mostly
But
thinking
then,
about the Marxian way. Like, sorry to interrupt you. I just thought of the classic structural orthodox idea of orthodox Marxist, of being predetermined in that sense. Not the theological one, but yeah.
Yeah, a good point. And then of course, yeah, Marx talks about what is it he says? The division of labor prefiguring. I've lost, it's been a while since I read Capital. But yeah, I remember the prefiguration.
I know what you mean.
What is it? It's the division of labor prefiguring the socialization of labor and therefore prefiguring communism. I think that's the
yes.
So yeah, neither the Marxist structuralist determinist, the structuralist determinist reading of Marx and prefiguration, nor the Christian prophetic version of prefiguration, but the Negrian reading of prefiguration as a process of becoming, as the archetypical, I think he calls it, the archetypical process of becoming. And that's his term dysutopia that I mentioned and didn't explain, what he calls the anti-nowhere. I think he takes it from Spinoza. The anti-nowhere, which is very much like the Ernst Bloch's not yet, the existence of utopia today in its potential. And so it's agential. I keep using the word agential, basically to refer to it being strategic, as opposed to accidental or structural. So it's a strategic pushing towards the utopian endpoint, which never arrives, but you are in a dysutopian fashion, or asymptotically, to be mathematical about it, your asymptotic curve is your political practice, and the asymptote is the utopian horizon that you're never quite reaching, but you're getting ever closer to. I always really liked Michael Hart's explanation of this in his introduction to Thomas Jefferson's letters, published by Verso a while ago. A long time ago now, where he talks about how what is it? If prefiguration means achieving democracy through democracy, then it seems tautological and it seems to be stuck in place. And it has to be explained, therefore, as a process of infinite becoming, in that the democracy aimed for always exceeds the democracy currently being practiced. And so it's a constant negotiation within ourselves and within our movements and between ourselves, between our constantly evolving interpretation of speculation of the utopia we're aiming for and the means to get there. And the means obviously end up affecting our understanding of the goal, or means and ends would be a common terminology to use, right? Our means are constantly changing our ends, which are influencing our means. And so you're constantly moving, although the direction keeps changing and the goal keeps changing, but it is a strategic, or at least I argue it should be a strategic project of transformation, in contrast to the presentism of some contemporary anarchist so-called prefigurative politics, which I would argue doesn't deserve to be called prefigurative because it's astrategic.
No,
I hope that answers your question.
That's great. Alex is leaving, so I'm going to try to answer, like, because I was thinking about something that connects to what you guys are discussing, and also to try to answer his question and like the two things together, which is that, and then hopefully he can look at the recording later and see my answer to him. I think I think maybe one of the main ways in which we can separate this speculative, this like post-critical speculative thinking from like simply pre-critical or acritical speculative thinking is that you don't simply think that you have like neutral rational access to things themselves, but rather you think that the transcendental process through which the subject and the object are constructed as such, and therefore the object has to be constructed, is not separately epistemic in relation to how it is real. Like the transcendental process itself is real, and like it is predicated by this entanglement between what will eventually, or what might eventually appear as a subject or as an object. That the distinction between subject and object is itself an effect of this entanglement and of this encounter. I think that is already very clear in Deleuze and Guattari, and I think it is also in the kind of constitutional thought of Hart and Negri, in the sense that you have like the multitude is a plane of immanence in which the distinctions between subject and object are not given, and they can only emerge constituted as such a posteriori from a process in which the many virtual futures that are constitutive of the multitude itself, of reality itself as multitude, become actualized in this or that contingent structure in a certain juridical political context. So it's not to say that we have a direct metaphysical access to law as such, whether that is, you know, the next constitution, or whether that is the normativity of the planetary climate system in the Anthropocene, that is constructed because it is constructing, it is construction itself, you know, like the Anthropocene is this whole construction within which some scientists and some rocks and whatever other like stuff they need to measure are going to come together in a Latourian way and generate a certain kind of possible knowledge, whether that is factual or normative knowledge. So it's not about it not being practical or not being entangled. It's just about, I mean, in order to say that you have direct access to something that is already constituted as such, out there and that you're just going to find it, as Alex was saying at the beginning, would presuppose this separation, would presuppose that you have the object, the thing out there, and then you find it. And that would already be the epistemic correlationist approach. So if you don't have that, you have to assume that a priori you and the things out there are all mixed, and that results in the sort of transcendental empiricism, to use Deleuze's term, or empiricist metaphysics, which is the Whiteheadian take that a lot of those new pragmatists also like. So it's neither one thing nor the other. And to me, that connects to this prefigurative thing, in the sense that since all of that takes place not in the actual, but in the virtual, then the prefiguration is about how those gnomic processes act in order to not determine, like, finally, on the last instance, like single-handedly or anything like that, but at least to raise the probability, as it were, of a certain virtuality becoming actual. So it's a sort of a hyperstitional process in which you sort of map out certain multiplicity of virtualities, and you try to map out what are the power relations in which you can make some kind of intervention there, and then but by that very process, you are trying to make a certain virtual state of affairs more likely to actualize itself. You're trying to actualize it, right? And you're involved in that process. You're not a subject that is previous or separate from that very process.
Yeah, exactly. That reminds me of another way I've been thinking about prefiguration, which is as the attempt to actively and strategically deploy path dependency. You're trying to create your own path dependency.
Yeah, I was curious about what you meant by. Can you unpack this idea of path dependency that you're mobilizing? That seems interesting.
Yeah, so just I've just been dealing with a fairly sort of simplistic understanding of it, but from my interpretation of the broad consensus from institutionalist political science and sociology, that institutions of whatever type tend towards path dependency, in that the way things are done tend to continue. That it's easier for things to be done in the same way that they have been done than it is for things to be done in a new way. And that creates not an absolute determinism, but a deterministic tendency, I suppose you could say, in terms of the relationship between present and future. And there is a path-dependent assumption in prefigurative strategies that the way you do things in the present does indeed shape, or, as you were saying, sort of make more probable certain virtual futures rather than others. Yeah, and then also, just to add to that, I think it sounds like maybe I should read Melisso's After Finitude. It sounds like correlationism is particularly crucial for your understanding of the speculative nature of this. Because there's another interesting dichotomy, I think, has emerged from the discussion, which is that between speculation in the everyday language sense, which is my only real access to this, because I haven't read my Melisso, I haven't read my speculative realists, unfortunately. And on the other hand, the technical definitions of speculation in that literature, which clearly you're orienting yourself around more precisely than I'm able to.
Yeah, no, but don't take me too seriously on that. As I said, like, my reading of Meyasu's correlationism is very loose in terms of the way he uses it. I'm not that much close to the speculative realists themselves. I'm a lot more connected to ontological anthropology, and then to this kind of Deleuze-Guattarian assemblage theory, or you can connect that to new materialisms as well. Yeah, I mean, Meyasu, I think Meyasu, Brazier, all those guys, they are very abstract philosophers, like technical philosophers, that I don't feel like I feel like I would read. I mean, I should probably read Meyasu's After Finitude a lot better than I have until now, but we can do that eventually.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe that's another good candidate to add to the reading list for the group.
So who else thinking about something?
I'm thinking I am afraid I should probably go. I need to go and pick up the dog from daycare. So I think I am in this slight lull. I'm gonna say goodbye, but it was lovely to meet everyone. Thank you for having me
Yeah,
and putting up
we're
with
about
me.
time to be finishing it, but yeah, thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye. Yeah, I mean, thanks everyone for being here until now. I don't know if we're going to have another meeting like this one is like the November one, but it's already almost December. I think like next year. Don't know if we're starting in January or when, because we don't have the next meeting set up yet. But we are talking to a number of very interesting guests that we're thinking about having. We want to restart the um the Zoom meetings with like attractions that can make more people interested. We should probably make like a new kind of text for like a general call for people who might not have heard of the network yet. We're going to try to circle it through different mailing lists and stuff to get more people involved. And also, it would be great if any of you want to get involved in any way with making more things happen around these concepts. As I mentioned, we are working on a handbook proposal on speculative legal theory, which is an effort to create sort of a, to really like establish this as a field with a lot of like, with all of the basic stuff that you gotta understand for context in order to, and then with all the different, themes and problems that appear as potential subdivisions and paths for collective research. So it's really something that it's probably only possible to do in a sort of collective way. And then it's really interesting to think how our different interests are able to connect to this larger endeavor and also influence each other and help each other in all different kinds of senses. As I said, like right now we're trying to invite relatively well-known figures that we think might be in some way representative of what we understand as speculative legal theory, but we also want to have meetings in which we are going to present our own work, whether something that we've finished that we think has to do with what you're doing here, or in progress work as well. So yeah, like if anyone is also like watching this on YouTube, if you're interested, try to contact us in one way or another. You can write to moreWillAppear@gmail.com, or you can find any kind of, you can send a message through YouTube, or find some of us on the internet somehow. And we should probably do a newsletter. So after you are in the mailing list, we're going to try to do sort of a monthly, not only meeting, but also try to, in the same email, inform of the next meeting and of whatever news or processes are going on at the time, so that people can get involved to try to organize academic events, we're talking with Hermano about the possibility of organizing something that is also connected to the network. We are organizing this book. There's a lot of things that we can do around this. So yeah, let's keep in touch and hopefully see you soon in the next meeting. Thanks a lot for being here. I'm going to end the recording.